Hello everyone, this is Tom from Los Angeles. I hope everyone is doing well. I have a quote here. T.S. Eliot, a British poet, he said that the world of literature was Dante and Shakespeare, in his opinion. And there is no third, there's no number three. He also said that the prayer to Mary in Canto 33 of Paradiso, in the Divine Comedy, is the highest point ever reached by Western poetry. Luis Borges was equally crazy about Dante. He said the Divine Comedy is the best book that literature has ever achieved. I personally agree with them both. I am also equally crazy, if not crazier, about the Divine Comedy. And this is why I've decided to, as a purely somebody who's passionate about Dante and the Divine Comedy, to do a series of 100 videos, one for each canto of the Divine Comedy, brief videos where I'm going to try to explain as concisely as possible and to highlight the main points of each canto to my English-speaking friends, actual friends, online friends, and on BookTube. Number one, as a disclaimer, I'm not a specialist I'm not a professor, I'm not anything like that. I just love the book. I've been studying it. I've been rereading it already. I participated to a portion of a PhD here at UCLA about the Divine Comedy, but that certainly doesn't give me any type of title, which can be a positive because I'm speaking about it purely out of love, purely as somebody who really loves the book, and I would like other people to understand how much I love it, and if possible, to fall in love with it as well. My disclaimer number two is that I'm from Italy. Obviously, being Italian means having the great privilege to be able to read Dante in Italian. I'm going to follow a couple of English translations, the ones that I think are good ones. In fact, one is by Robert Pinsky, a New Verse translation. It's fairly recent. I'm going to put all the details below. And the other one is by Mark Musa, which I don't have here, but I will also... they're both really good ones. Also, being Italian, I was raised Catholic as a kid. I left Italy when I was around 20, and I completely, like many teenagers and 20 years old Italians, I completely ignored religion in my 20s, and then went back to it in my 30s out of my own volition. It was my own decision. It kind of happened, and so since then I've been Catholic, and being able to read and talk about the Divine Comedy and talk about the Divine Comedy from the Christian point of view, I certainly think is a plus. It makes you appreciate it more. However, it's certainly not a book only for Christians at all. It's a fantastic, magnificent work that can be appreciated by anybody, Christian or not, atheist, from all over the spectrum, because the truths and the concepts that are at the bottom of it are deeply universal. They're very human. So you can enjoy it in any way. So this is going to be only an introduction. I'm going to start with the first canto with the next video. This is only an intro and kind of an announcement. I'm going to do this crazy thing, 100 videos, and try to put a framework around the entire work. Very briefly, of course. The Divine Comedy is one book. It's one book divided in three. As opposed to some of the stereotypes, I often hear about Inferno a lot. I hear about it as the best part of the Divine Comedy, or the most fun part of the Divine Comedy. In a certain sense, that's true, but it's also incorrect, and I also disagree with it, because my favorite book of the Divine Comedy is actually Purgatory. It's a personal favorite. And Paradiso is it contains some of the really highest poetry, like T.S. Eliot said, and is unique in the sense that it achieves what poetry very rarely did, which was to talk about philosophy and theology and really the highest matters in a poetic form. But we'll get to that. Fundamentally, Dante sets out to write a love poem. We all heard about Beatrice, who was the love interest of Dante. We're going to discuss about that because there are a little bit of misunderstandings about the relationship between Dante and Beatrice as well, which was much more spiritual and theoretical and abstract than real. Beatrice was certainly not Dante's mistress, like somebody might think. She was not somebody who Dante had physical relationships ever. She was simply somebody who existed. She existed. She was a real person. Dante met her, and in his hypersensitivity, Dante was struck by the grace and beauty that she represented. And from that moment, she became a symbol for him. She became the symbol of everything that is beautiful, pure, graceful, and lovely. And the Divine Comedy is a love poem because he promised he would write for her the greatest love poem ever written in the history of poetry. And you know, he was pretty ambitious, but he actually did it. So he decided to put his love for her in the background or against the context of the Christian concept of love and the Christian framework, which obviously allowed him to give the poem much more texture and depth. Dante in 1300, in the story of the Divine Comedy, he is in 1300, he is 35 years old. He was born in 1265. And this is why the famous first lines are midway in the journey of our life, because in the Middle Ages in general, 35 was really thought to be, roughly speaking, a good average of the mid of your life, the center of your life, that would generally last around 70 years. The Divine Comedy starts making it clear that it's about a spiritual awakening. It's a spiritual awakening, just like many spiritual masters before Dante and after Dante, they made it clear, or they highlighted, that spiritual awakenings tend to happen around the midlife for anybody, men and women. It's a moment that sometimes happens to people where you need to metaphorically wander through the desert, investigate your own soul, and until you find your own orientation for your life, maybe a new orientation, but in any case, wake up from a period of crisis or from a period of terrible addiction, for example, from a period of feeling lost or self-destructive behavior. And this is exactly where Dante meets us at the very beginning of Inferno, Canto First. He is in a crisis. He is trying to come out of a crisis in his life. Obviously, he had a lot of troubles physically and in reality in his life, because he had been exiled from Florence, his city, and he was feeling lost. Now, like any spiritual journey, it's very important to have a guide. It's very important to have a spiritual director or a mentor. And this is something that's always been, because a spiritual journey is something difficult to do, because if you do it by yourself, it gets complicated very fast and very easily. So as his mentor, Dante chooses the best one that he could choose for himself, which is Virgil, the author of the famous Aeneid. And there are many reasons why Dante chooses Virgil. Number one, the fact that he absolutely loved Virgil and Virgil's poetry. He considered Virgil to be his great model, and he also considered himself to be the really the person that Virgil would pass the baton to, in a certain sense, as from great poet to great poet. Dante certainly didn't have a lot of modesty about himself. So Dante comes out of the woods, as we all know. We're going to see the first canto in detail, of course, and sees Virgil. Virgil tells him, look, I got good news and bad news. The good news is that there is a way out of this terrible crisis and suffering that you're in. I'm going to help you out. The bad news is we're going to need to go to hell. And that's exactly what they do together. There's no way to, this is something they teach in AA meetings as well. This is something that is a foundation of the 12 Steps program as well. The only way up is down. And that's a deep truth that comes out of the Divine Comedy as well. Dante in the beginning tries to kind of take the short road up the hill, but there are three beasts that we're going to see in the next video that represent his own dysfunctions, and he's not able to go straight. First of all, he needs to go with Virgil down into hell and come face to face with his soul's dysfunctions. A big difference with other epic poems, and something really original in what Dante does in his epic poem, The Divine Comedy, is that he's not talking about something distant like the afterlife and as a third-person narrator. He puts himself in the poem. He is the main character, the main protagonist of the poem, and this is not simply a kind of an egocentric ego trip that he does. He has a lot of great reasons to do them, but the main one is, and this is also my opinion, I would say, is that it works much better with him as personally invested in the poem. It has much more resonance with the reader, I believe, and this is why also it's so it speaks to you so closely. It's not like a Greek tragedy, let's say, where you read about relatives eating each other or having incest with each other, which makes you think about deep psychological truths, and it works, yes, but it always feels a little bit cold and distant. Dante is there. He talks about himself, his own feelings. He cries, he laughs, he talks about his friends, he talks about his enemies, his own love, his own hate. And what happens when, again, when you're in a restaurant, in a bar, somebody talks about themselves, especially if you're interested in what they're saying, in this way. You think about yourself in this way, and you think about your friends, your enemies, if you have any, your loves, your hates, as a reflection of that. And this is exactly the mechanism that works in the Divine Comedy. And this is why, reading the Divine Comedy, especially if you read it all from Inferno to Paradiso, is really like having somebody hand you over an X-ray of your soul, an X-ray of your soul dysfunctions, a guide of what to do with your soul in order to be happier or in order to achieve happiness. And then you're free to do whatever you want with it. But it's incredible how that at least happened to me the first time that I reread it after school, because when you read it in school you don't understand anything, with a mature and attentive eye. You see yourself like in a mirror, but even better, like in an X-ray. And how is this possible? How does the Divine Comedy do that? And what book could ever do that? There are three ways in which Dante achieves this. And this is my own structure. Number one, the afterlife that he's describing is clearly not only an idea of the afterlife, but maybe most importantly, is an atemporal dimension, is here and now. He's not talking about something that happens after your death. He's actually talking about something that happens to your soul right now, in your life, before your death. And he knows that, because, and in this sense, the Divine Comedy has a lot of different layers. Only obviously at an invisible level. Number two, because Dante is putting his own life, like I said, in front of the Christian, he matches it against the Christian framework. He's reflecting, the Christian framework, the Christian tradition has been reflecting about the human soul for many centuries before in extremely deep ways. So he is coming from having read St. Thomas Aquinas, having read, and you can say, because, and you can tell because there are many echoes of Aquinas and St. Augustine, some of the greatest geniuses of the Christian tradition in the Divine Comedy. And number three, because again, Dante is talking about his real self. He's not making it distant. He's making it he's making it very personal, very personal. So it's something similar to almost psychology or psychoanalysis, but it goes much further than that, in my opinion, because it offers you the real way to achieve happiness in this life, the real healthy way to achieve happiness. The Divine Comedy gives you a solution, gives you a direction. Psychology and psychoanalysis have a lot of deep truths within them, but they're very biological truths, and they are truths that don't really give you a human direction. They tend to dehumanize the human person because they come from a scientific and very cold and distant type of background. So they can be useful, but in my opinion, not as useful as what a spiritual journey can do to your life and to your existence. In fact, this is a truth that has echoes in a lot of the Christian tradition. Like Saint Ignatius said, being Christian means being at war with the world. So on one hand, you have science, you have biology, they all work because they're all part of our world. But being human, in a Christian sense, means being at war with the world. St. Paul said being Christian means being in this world, but not of this world. And J.C. Chesterton said, I was really happy only once I learned that man is a monstrosity. I had understood that I was in the wrong place, and my soul sang for joy like a bird in spring. So there is no paragraph in Freud or Jung, when you read Freud, when you read Jung, that can make your soul sing for joy like a bird. I don't think. We all want to be happy. This is what we want every single day, from morning to evening. But by loving something that is less than God, in Dante's opinion and in the Christian tradition's opinion, the damned lose their ability to be happy. Now, this is a concept that can be extended outside of Christianity as well. In fact, it was, we have St. Augustine on one hand, on the Christian tradition, who said, God, you have made me for you, and my heart is restless until it rests in you. But then outside of the Christian tradition, there are many echoes of this deep concept. The concept of the fact that human beings are made to worship, and or maybe the God-shaped hole in our brain. I believe that was Pascal. But I want to make a final conclusive quote from David Foster Wallace, because I just read his Infinite Jest, and I've been a little bit into David Foster Wallace's way of thinking, which is marvelous. And he echoed this concept in his famous commencement speech that is found on YouTube. We Are Water, I think is the title. And he says, because here's something else that's true. In the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there is actually no such thing as atheism. There is no such thing as not worshipping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. And an outstanding reason for choosing some sort of God or spiritual type thing to worship, be it Jesus Christ or Allah, or be Yahweh or the Wiccan Mother Goddess or the Four Noble Truths or any type of infrangible set of ethical principles, is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. This is something coming from somebody who was a recovering alcoholic and knew a thing or two about the 12 steps, and that the only way up is down. I'm looking forward to doing this 100 videos. I love the idea. I am doing it because obviously I love Dante, so I love rereading it, but it would be great to do it in the company of somebody else who's also interested to do it. And I'll try to upload maybe something like a video every week about it, but obviously it's going to be a balance of things, and I'll try to be realistic. So let's do it.